Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to learn about classification of goods in the Sale of Goods Act 1930. The Sale of Goods Act 1930 was came into force from 1st July 1930. It deals with laws relating to the sale of goods in India. Before passing of this Sale of Goods Act, the Sale of Goods Act was covered in the Indian Contract Act. This act deals with the laws relating to sale of goods in India. This act was mainly based on English Sale of Goods Act 1893. Before the Sale of Goods Act 1930, all the provisions relating to Sale of Goods Act was covered under the chapter 7 of Indian Contract Act 1872. Sale of goods is one of the specific forms of contract recognized and regulated by law in India. The provisions of this act are applicable to the contracts relating to the sale of goods, which means movable property. The act is not applicable for sale of immovable properties like land, fields, shop, etc. For immovable property, Transfer of Property Act 1882 is applicable and Sale of Goods Act 1930 deals with movable property alone. The general provisions of the Indian Contract Act 1872 apply to a contract of sale of goods as far as they are not inconsistent with the express provisions of the Sale of Goods Act. According to Section 4 of the Sale of Goods Act 1930, a contract of sale of goods is a contract whereby seller transfers or agrees to transfer the property in goods to the buyer for a money consideration called the price. This was the definition given under the sale under the Sale of Goods Act 1930. This definition clearly defines what do you mean by sale. It makes that transfers or agrees to transfer of property. It says that there will be the transfer of property from one person to another person. The person the person who is receiving the property should be the buyer, and the transfer is to be made for the money consideration. The money consideration is called the price. And the next one, what are the essentials of the sale of goods? These are the essentials. The first essential is about bilateral contract. Second one is transfer of property. Third one is goods. Fourth one is money consideration. Fifth one is all essential elements of a valid contract. Let us see one by one what are the essential conditions for the sale under the Sale of Goods Act. First essential is bilateral contract. To pick up the sale as a contract under the Sale of Goods Act 1930, the first essential condition is to be bilateral contract. It is a bilateral contract because the property in goods has to pass from one party to another party. A person cannot buy the goods himself. And the second essential condition for the contract is transfer of property. The object of the contract of the sale must be the transfer of property. That means the ownership is to be transferred from one person to another person. And third important essential for the validity of the contract is goods. The main subject matter of the Sale of Goods Act is a good. And fourth essential is price or money consideration. The goods must be sold for some price. Where goods are exchanged for goods, it's a barter, not a sale. So, any goods are exchanged for another, that will be It's considered as a barter system. So when the goods are transferred from one person to another person, it must be sold for some price. That is an important essential. And fifth one is when the contract is made under the Sale of Goods Act, all the essential elements of valid contract must be present in the contract of sale. If all these five essential conditions are satisfied, then the contract would be take as a valid contract under the Sale of Goods Act 1930. Now let us see the important definitions used under the Sale of Goods Act 1930. The first definition is about the buyer. Section 2.1 of the Sale of Goods Act 1930. The buyer means a person who buys or agrees to buy the goods. That we know very well, but we must understand the definition says under the Act. And the next important definition is about the seller. Section 213 of the Act says that seller means a person who sells or agrees to sell the goods. Two terms buyer and seller are complementary and represent two parties to the contract of sale of goods. Both the terms are, however, used in the sense wider than their common meaning. Not only the person who buys, but also one who agrees to buy is a buyer. Similarly, a seller means not only a person who sells, but also a person who agrees to sell. And third important definition is the goods. Goods is a subject matter of Sale of Goods Act that we already discussed in this video. Goods means every kind of movable property other than actionable claims and money, and includes stock and shares, growing crops, grass, and things attached to or forming part of the land which are agreed to be served or separated from the land before sold or under the contract of sale. Any goods in this case, goods includes both tangible and intangible goods such as goodwill, copyrights, patents, trademarks, etc. Stock, shares, gas, steam, water, electricity are also considered to be the goods. Actionable claims. Actionable claims are claims which are enforced only by action or suit. In certain situations, certain claims which can be enforced by an action by the court of law, those claims are treated as actionable claims. So, actionable claims are not covered under the Sale of Goods Act under the term goods, but goods includes both tangible and intangible goods. And let us see the classification of goods. Generally, the goods are classified under three heads such as existing goods, future goods, and contingent goods. Existing goods are again classified under three major heads: specific goods, ascertained goods, and unascertained goods. Let us see one by one. The first classification is existing goods. What do you mean by existing goods? Existing goods are such goods which are in existence at the time of contract of sale. That is, those owned or possessed or acquired by the seller at the time of contract of sale. These existing goods may be of three types. The first one is specific goods. Specific goods section 214 of the Sale of Goods Act says that specific goods means goods identified and agreed upon at the time of contract of sale is made. For example, any specified or finally decided goods by a person at the time of buying the goods. If the buyer wants to buy a particular branded car, is more particular about buying a car. In such a case, that type of goods is known as a specific goods. That means the buyer is very clear in buying a particular type of product. The next one is ascertained goods. What do you mean by ascertained goods? Ascertained goods are those goods which are identified in accordance with the agreement after the contract of sale is made. For example, a wholesaler of a cotton has 100 bales in his godown. He agrees to sell 50 bales, and these bales were selected and set aside. On the selection, goods become unascertained. In this case, the contract is for the sale of ascertained goods, as the cotton bales is to be sold or identified and agreed after the formation of the contract. It may be noted that before the ascertainment of the contract was for the sale of unascertained goods. In the case of ascertained goods, once the goods are ascertained by the buyer from the godown, this is known as the ascertained goods. These are without knowing the particular category of the goods. The goods will be considered as unascertained goods. And the third classification is unascertained goods. Already we understood about the ascertained goods. Let us see what is unascertained goods. Unascertained goods are those goods which are not specifically identified or ascertained at the time of making of the contract. They are indicated or defined only by description. For example, if a person agrees to buy a product or one bottle of Pepsi out of the different types or different bottles available in the shop. If you want to take up any one Pepsi out of the 100 bottles in the rack, he select any one of the goods. He believed that the product will be same and he cannot identify a particular bottle out of the 100 bottle. That is a sale of unascertained goods because he is not known about the packet which is to be delivered. Everything will be same, but he cannot particularly define the product which should be more particular about the type of Pepsi he wants to buy. The next important classification is future goods. Future goods means goods to be manufactured or produced or acquired by the seller after making the contract of sale. For example, a person wants to get a mango out of the mango tree, out of the mango tree grown in future. And another example, if a person wants to sell a milk that the cow would yield in the future or in the coming year. This is the contract for the sale of goods in future. Or if a person wants to get the sugar out of the sugar cane produced in the land in future. So any goods or any contract is made out of the goods which will be produced in the future period will be known as future goods. And finally, contingent goods. Contingent goods is the acquisition of goods which depends upon an uncertain contingency, that is uncertain event, are known as contingent goods, such as the goods which is in transit in the sea will be considered as a contingent goods. I hope you would be very clear about the classification of goods.